Do you feel that your experiences prior to gaining formal training and formal qualifications still influence the way you do things now?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I would say I taught for 12 years before I got my first teaching qualification, which was a graduate diploma in education. I think those 12 years were my best teaching years. I learned things through my formal studies, there's no doubt about it, and I'm so glad to have acquired formal qualifications because in the eyes of many, you have no credibility unless you've got those pieces of paper, those degrees, etc. But they did not form me as a teacher. I had my best years as a teacher before I got any piece of paper saying I was qualified. I think my teaching style was just formed again by my personality and what I wanted the kids to learn.
Do you feel that your qualifications and formal training as such, for lack of a better word, bound you? Because you mentioned that you had your best years prior to your formal training, and I'd imagine that was the case because you had a level of creativity.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Spontaneity. Yeah. Look, getting formal qualifications didn't bind me. They did make me probably more confident in when I'm engaged in dealing with people in particular forums or events, like where I work now, if I didn't have teaching qualifications, I would be utterly redundant. I wouldn't be taken seriously at all. I can be where I am now in Sydney Catholic Schools office. I can visit schools and present to staff meetings and at retreats and run pilgrimages and speak at conferences and events because I have formal qualifications. So the formal qualifications, I don't think bound me. They didn't bind me in my personal style of teaching. I still teach the way I want to teach. They actually opened doors for me, doors of credibility in the minds of other people, because in my mid-50s now, I have a certain level of experience and seniority, and young teachers who are up and coming, and there's a lot of good young teachers who are up and coming with a good spirit, positive spirit, and they're ones I'm targeting and trying to encourage and, look to the future about leadership in our schools. To young people, when they see someone like myself who's 25, 30 years more experienced than them, they take me seriously because I do have qualifications.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you were to go back in time and look at history and specifically how you ended up in the teaching role, could you tell us that story?
Yeah, I think it's one of my favourite stories. As a 16-year-old, I decided I wanted to be a barrister, particularly a criminal law barrister. And so I entered law school after year 12 at the age of 17. And the first 3 years of my law school was just like any normal student. But in fourth year, right near the end of fourth year, just about 5.5 weeks before I was meant to finish my last exams, I came down with a depression. And that depression debilitated me for years. I did not finish my law degree until 3.5 years later. 3.5 years after my original scheduled time. In that 3.5 years, from the age of 21 to 25, my life changed profoundly. I was always religious, but my faith went to new levels because of associations with good Catholics that I'd met at law school, at university, and those associations strengthened. So, and by the age of 25, I was very intense about my faith, but I was still in law. I'd worked in various law jobs, in the Supreme Court for a year as a judge's assistant. I did 15 months with a solicitor and doing conveyancing and debt collection. I did nearly 2 years at Westpac Banking Corporation and legal services and legal division. It was when I was in legal division, there, fifth floor of 228 Pitt Street. That's where the formal cases that Westpac Banking Corporation were being involved with in the courts. And I was once given by a barrister a brief. It was a big file, it was about that thick, and it was Little Old Lady versus Westpac Banking Corporation. And the barrister said to me, "Robert, we want to settle this out of court. Can you study the file and let's make the woman an offer?" And about 3 hours later, he came back to me and he said, "Well, what do you think, Rob?" Look, I was going through the file one page at a time, and actually when when I was studying it, my heart turned towards the woman. I was on her side. I felt sorry for her, but I'm paid to represent Westpac Banking Corporation. And when the barrister asked me that question, I said, well, let's offer her 80,000. The barrister said to me very politely, oh, Robert, we don't normally start that high, which meant in my mind, in hindsight, either you don't know what you're talking about, and that was pretty close to the mark. I didn't know what I was really talking about, but whose side are you on? Well, I can answer the second question very easily. I was on the side of the woman. But in that moment, when he said that, and he was a gentleman when he said that, I said in my heart, I'm not giving myself to the kingdom of Westpac, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew at that moment, as a 25-year-old, that the rest of my life was not going to be working for Westpac Banking Corporation. That same week, I got sick. There was the onset of another depression. And I went to confession at the cathedral. The priest said something which was very powerful. I wasn't ready to hear it that moment, but what he said was correct and true. And I went home. I was away from work for 3 days. And in that 3 days, I went down to my parish there at St Charles, and I went to visit the head of the monastery, and I got to chatting with him about a few issues religious. And then I asked him this question, look, Father, I've finished my law degree. I've lost interest in law. I don't really want to continue working in law. Have you got anything for me to do here? And he offered me a job in the school. At that time in 1989, August 89, St Charles only was up to year 7, K to 7. And I never even gave the school a thought. I never had any desire to be a teacher or anything like that. But when he offered me that job, something just lit in my heart. And I just said, yeah, wow, that sounds exciting. I want to do that. That would be great. And a couple of days later, I was introduced to the college principal, who then again a few days later introduced me to the school executive, not for a job interview, but just to tell the executive who I was and what I was about. And the principal at the time, Father George, said, Robert, I want you to start teaching straight away in 1990. You're going to do year 7 and 8 history, geography and religion. You get a dip ed and you'll be fine. I didn't want to go back to uni. It took me 12 years to get that dip ed. But that's how I became a teacher. And from that moment, in August 89, I went back to work. I resigned on the spot, but I still had 5 months in my job. I gave them 5 months notice before I was to start in the following year in early February. I couldn't wait for those 5 months to come to pass. I actually felt a little bit ill, just overexcited about finishing those days to start at St Charles. And I never forget my first day at St Charles. Seems like just the other day, but I've loved every minute of it, and I made the right decision in my life, and I've no regrets whatsoever. And if I was to do it all over again, I would.
There are a few things that you mentioned which I'd like to ask you about. You said that when you were flipping through the case file for the little old lady against Westpac, that you were inclined to side with the little old lady. Would it be fair to say that in actual fact you weren't siding with the little old lady, but you were actually siding with the truth?
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
You'd agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. She had a case. The bank knew that. That's why they wanted to settle it out of court. Right. Yeah.
And do you feel that was the flavour of your role, despite that case being presented in front of you? Do you feel that there were other instances like it, perhaps not as extreme, which were...
To be honest, that was the only case that was like that. But my overall experience at that level in Westpac Banking Corporation Legal Division was that I was bored to death. In legal services, it was a lot of fun. It was a property boom at the time, and we were dealing with all the instruments relating to mortgages and certificates of title and transfers, and they were coming in. It was a deluge of them. It was a lot of fun doing with that type of work. I enjoyed conveyancing. When I was working with a solicitor, I was doing a lot of conveyancing. So when I was at Westpac Legal Services, that was the type of job I was doing. So I was involved with, mortgages and the mortgage instruments being registered on certificates of title with the transfer documents. It was a lot of fun. I loved it. It was okay being there. When I went up to legal division, that's when it became very anemic, very, very dry. And I think this is how God prepared me. God took away my love for the legal world, not because there was anything wrong with it. We need lawyers. We need great lawyers. We need very good men and women who are Catholic to be lawyers for obvious reasons. And if anyone's listening to this and aspiring to law, I would say, well, go for it. But he called me out of that because he wanted me to do something else that was positive, and that was teaching. And the way he prepared me was to firstly take away any interest anymore in law. And I went through that for a little while. I just knew I knew what I did not want to be, but I did not know what I would be. But that came very quickly, and I have a lot to thank to God for that, because when I had no plans to be a teacher, and suddenly I'm offered a job to be a teacher. And it happened. And as soon as it happened, the spark lit in my heart. And that was it. As I said already, there's no turning back from there.